Francis, thank you so much once again for making time to talk to KUTV. You know, you have been on the front line for the last, let's say, over 10 years, yes. Providing, of course, porridge for learners. Well, in your own assessment, what has worked and what has not worked so far?
In terms of the porridge or in terms of the government plans?
In terms of you being a key stakeholders in this, as far as, the whole issue of providing, food for school-going children, that is learners, your part is to provide porridge. Of course, there are those that are provide basic essential, and of course, the government has been, of course, chipping in such program. As a person who has been there, you have seen the system. I'm sure you've interacted with the learners the way they are.
Yes.
What has worked and what has not worked so far?
Okay, what I can say is that for us, the porridge has worked in terms of trying to even, we have seen increase in enrollment of children in school. And again, another thing is that they're able to concentrate in class because the porridge is given in the morning. Mostly we prefer them getting it before classes start, so that the kids who didn't have something the previous night or that morning can have something in their tummy, because as you understand, most of the technical subjects are studied in the morning. Maths, the sciences, you don't do them in the afternoon. So that breakfast goes a long way in helping such students be able to concentrate in class. It helps with their academics, it helps with their co-curricular activities. They're able to be at least active, just not in class, but also even in playing outside. So yeah, so that is something that we've witnessed.
All right. Well, the idea of porridge, of course, how did it come up? And so far, how successful it is?
Okay, so this is very interesting. The idea of porridge came about in 2011. So back then I was a student at Mount Kenya University, and my late mom happened to be a primary school teacher. She was teaching at Nyatwere Primary School, which is in Homa Bay County, and I happened to visit her. So when I visited the school, I realized there were kids who were outside the classroom, and then interestingly, they kind of tended to look weak. So I've always loved learning and knowing people's stories. So I asked, what was their story? What was the story of these children? Why were they the way they were? And that is when I was explained that for most of them within that community setup, most of them were kids who were from families where they were either total or partial orphans. And with that in mind, most of them were being taken care of by the grandparents. So these grandparents didn't have a very active source of income in terms of being economically engaged. And as a result of that, they couldn't have 3 square meals a day for the kids. So these kids would come to school with nothing in the morning, without having had breakfast at home or even supper the previous night. And so they would come to school like that, and they were expected to learn. So in my own small way, I thought, what could I do in my small way being a student? Because I was like, in as much as, you might also, because I've loved children growing up. So I thought, what could I do in a small way? In my small capacity, even if I save in terms of pocket money here and there and do some hustles in campus, then I get something. Then I wanted to give these children rice and beans, because I figured out rice and beans is kind of balanced, because you have proteins, you have all that mixture.
All right.
But when I did the math in terms of if I were to do rice and beans, then I realized the cost implications would be way above what my pocket could afford back then.
Okay.
Then that is how I said, okay, I've always loved porridge, which is uji. And I said, how about I just do uji for these kids? And the uji that I was doing was not really the one that we currently use. It was just the white maize, you grind, take the flour to the school, and it was purely for preschool children who were slightly over 100 children at that particular school.
Okay.
So that was the start of Cup of Uji, yes.
Okay. So which mechanism do you use to determine, like, this is the school that you'll take, you'll take the program,
yes.
and this is the school that maybe you'll exclude. And so far, as far as, of course, the Cup of Uji is concerned, how many schools have you, reached so far? And in terms of numbers, how many people have you fed? Okay, so what determines that is that most of the time you get a lot of people coming to your social media feeds and saying, there's this school that we feel might benefit from Cup of Uji. Or there are schools that maybe you are going to do an activity somewhere and you come across them and you're like,
this school might benefit from Kapovuji.
Okay.
But what we do is that we have a team. So the team goes and does what we call needs assessment for such particular schools, the one recommended to us and the ones we've seen. So they do that needs assessment, and that determines whether the kids from that particular school will benefit, whether a greater percentage of the kids in that particular school will benefit from a Kapovuji.
Okay.
So from that aspect, now we put them on our list. And then now from there again, we look at what resources do we have? Do we have the available resources to be able to support that particular school? If we don't have, then we put them on a waiting list. But if we have, we pick it up and we start supporting it.
Okay.
So that is how we are able to bring on board schools in terms of supporting them with a Kapovuji. And so far, we've been able to do 11 schools, which are in 5 counties, and a total of over 10,000 children.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, when I was reading the statistics, that is, as far as this is the government target. The government target the ASAL, that is the arid and semi-arid lands, and of course schools in the informal settlement. In your own, I'm not sure how you operate, but what's your target? What's your target audience? Like, which specific schools do you target? And is it based on the entire school, or just identify, let's say, these people X and X deserve this and not this one? So which criteria do you use?
Okay, so this is the thing. When you walk into a school, you can't really start. Kids have something we call a common bond amongst them. So you can't really start segregating kids. Mentally, it affects them. If you say I'm giving porridge to pupil A and I'm not giving to pupil B, and they're all in the same class, they're going to be like, why is so and so receiving? Why am I not being given?
All right.
So when we pick a school, we support the whole school. We focus mainly on public primary schools in 5 counties, that is West Pokot, Nairobi, Kilifi, Kajiado, and Homa Bay counties.
Okay.
So those are the counties within which Kapovuji operates, and we specifically seek to support public primary schools, and not because it is easier, because they are more of like kind of structured. It's easier to even have engagements with even the parents as well, the community. So it is more structured, and it is more easier to work with. Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
Well, you talk about in some aspect the stigma when you separate, of course.
Yes.
Well, when you look at the system that the government is using to actually distribute, this food program, to some extent, it's like separating the rest from. And if you were to go by your standard, then something really need to be done. If it's feeding program for all school-going children, then it need to be equitable. That's why there is this aspect of equitable. And this brings my question: do you think maybe we misplace our priorities? Is it something that we actually need to go back to the drawing board and actually do something? We are talking about over 30 years since this program was launched. Yes. And I remember when I began, I asked you, what has worked and what has not worked?
Okay, so interestingly, because I was also privy to that information of the government targeting 2.5 million kids in a country where you have over 8 million primary school children going to school in public primary schools. And so what I can say is that maybe what the government needs to do is maybe have all the stakeholders, all the people in the feeding sector, all the players in the school feeding setup just coming on board, and then they need to do a needs assessment, because like for all the schools, just see which schools really deserve to have this. But again, at the end of the day, when in reality, it is people have, they call it the right to food. I don't know how it is implemented, but I know there is that in our constitution. You have a right to eat, you have a right to food. But at the end of the day, school feeding should be a government initiative. It should be all kids that are in public primary institutions should be able to benefit from school feeding. Yeah. Well,
you are speaking to my curiosity, and I believe you're speaking to the curiosity of many who are watching us right now. You talk about, government, of course, coming together. This means you collaborate.
Yes.
Of course, you are one of the stakeholders in this food feeding program. You have been in existence since 2011.
Yes.
All the way, probably say 12 years down the line. Have you tried to reach the government and actually, compare and share notes as far as this journey is concerned, because it is for the better and common good of all our school-going children. Have you thought of that? Have you tried that?
Okay, so mine has been very interesting because I think I remember at the initial stages, because we would even invite some of the DC education officers whenever we were scaling up, maybe to add a new school or maybe scale up to have the old school catered for, we would invite the DC education officers to come just to see what we are doing on the ground. Now, interestingly, most of them would come with a long list of schools. They tell you, these schools will really benefit from this. But you see, there is the whole aspect of it takes resources to even be able to feed, and it should also be a government responsibility at the same time. So I think that disconnect needs to be worked around so that we see how should the government come in. I would really love to see maybe elected representatives develop a bill and say, you know, let's make school feeding a national policy. Let school feeding be a national policy driven from that angle, because with that it will be easier even for the government to allocate resources purely for school feeding, because right now we don't have really anything that you can say this is allocated for school feeding. What we have is allocations for maybe employing more teachers, you know, but if you employ more teachers and the kids don't have anything, will they learn? So that's the other question.
Well, Nairobi governor, that is Johnson Sakaja, of course, recently, I think it's just a couple of days, he launched the Hot Kitchen. And actually, this is an initiative that, you know, they are rooting for it to be actually spread throughout all 47 counties. Now, this is a global initiative. I'm sure you've heard of it. Now, do you see a possibility? Do you, first of all, do you see it as, you know, one of the game changer as far as, you know, going hunger zero for school-going children? Do you think this is a noble initiative that you need to join hands and actually push the mantra?
Yes, sure. It's something that I believe should be done, and it is good that Governor Sakaja is actually coming on board to try and see if this is something that can be pushed. But I'm only hoping that the implementation, it gets implemented. You know, sometimes we really hype some of these things, and then at the implementation stage, then all the noise dies. And then the kids who will be suffering. But these are our kids. This is our country. These are our kids. This is their future. So I wish that the implementation bit will go on, more stakeholders can come on board, more governors can come on board, even the government, the national government, because you see, also when you go back to, in terms of devolution, you realize that only preschool institutions, CCD centers are involved, and not the public primary school. The public primary schools are still under national government. So it becomes also tricky. I understand it becomes also tricky for some of the governors because they're like, they are unable to allocate county resources to support a national government function. So if the national government can come together with, you know, there is a council of governors, they can have maybe a round table, and then the stakeholders in the school feeding space, and then they have a common ground and say, let's implement this way and let it be for the betterment of our children, then that will be a plus.
All right. How, like, you know, one thing that it really, you know, baffles me, and I'm actually, you know, struggling to come to even get some clear answers. Of course, you have been running it, so why will it fail? Especially when the government is, you guys are there. What is this, you know, the secret, the one thing that have really worked for you that maybe you think the government can borrow from you? What is that one success factor?
Okay, I don't know. I mean, maybe I can say it boils down to also the management of resources. You know, so once you get resources to do something, then I think that is why I was talking about the implementation stage. So the implementation is the most important thing. So we can really use very minimal resources to be able to roll out something like that, and it doesn't need to really cost so much for our children to really enjoy some nutritious meals in school. So it boils down to how we manage the resources that are given and trusted to us. So that is what happens. That is I think that would be the difference that is there. Yes. Yeah.
Well, you are out there, of course, in the grassroots.
Yes.
Pale mashinani. What is the situation? Just how dire is the situation there?
Okay, things are tough. Just to be very honest, things are tough because I remember recently we've been having more of community engagement and involvement with our feeding, to the extent that we've been visiting the schools that we support, and then we have the parents coming on board. Now what we are trying to do is just to increase the accountability aspect around our school feeding and have the parents also engaged in every aspect of our school feeding. So what we have done is that we go to the schools, the parents have a meeting, then they elect 5 of them. Now the 5 of them, what the 5 do is that we just give them some instructions in terms of, we give them some forms. So Monday to Friday, because we feed daily Monday to Friday. So Monday to Friday, they say parent A will come to school on Monday. And then on that form, they fill and say, today, this number of kgs for porridge flour was used, this number of kgs for sugar was used, this number of kids were fed, this is what remained at the store. So that it brings a more accountable system in terms of what we are doing, because we cannot also always be there every day. But the parents, these are their kids. So that is part of also involving them and seeing how best can this work. So they have that level of organization. But when we were having those engagements, we were able to also witness what is there on the ground in terms of people are struggling, people are finding life is tough.
Okay.
Yeah, life is very tough.
Well, talking about life being tough, among the key areas, the gray areas that have been highlighted, of course, this is the limitation that have, to some extent, hinder the success of this school feeding program. One of them is the rapid growing population, and then we have the change in climatic conditions, which is pretty obvious. Well, this is something that we'll have to, of course, live with it and deal with it for quite a long time. But we have to steer ahead this ship, of course, and we have no option. We have to move forward. Well, even as we wind this, what is some of the recommendations that you will actually, of course, recommend going forward for those who are watching us, and even as you plan, of course, believe me, maybe you will plan this, even as you plan to, network, compare notes with other stakeholders out there for the common good of the school-going children. What are some of the recommendations that you will offer, of course, that you think will be helpful as far as this journey is concerned, regardless of the challenges?
Okay, so what I can say is that the government just needs to come on board and just have all the stakeholders just have a sit down, just have a conversation, and then they listen to the stakeholders. They listen. Okay, what has been your experiences in rolling out feeding in the various areas where you are running school feeding? What are the things that we can do better? Where can we improve? Because I know that is something that can go a long way. And then another thing, if the government can really develop school feeding as a national policy, that would be a plus. I would sleep a happy man knowing that all children in Kenya are enjoying school meals. And then again, there is the whole idea of partnership. If the government is also open to that, then they can partner with all the stakeholders. All the stakeholders can be brought on board. They partner. They see, okay, how best can we implement this? How best can we feed our learners? How best can we drive their education? How best can we also be able to just have them enjoying some nutritious meals? Because it goes a long way. According to at least WFP, they say, World Food Program, they say, for every dollar that is invested in feeding a kid, then $9 comes back in terms of economic empowerment for the community. So that it goes a long way. It is not, yes, it might be uji, it might be lunch, but at the end of the day, it has an effect on the community, it has an effect in the nation. So our GDP is able to grow, these kids are able to learn, they're able to pursue their dreams. So if we can come together, just partner, county governments, national governments, stakeholders, just have a partnership, even create a bill that have school feeding as a national policy, that would be a plus. All right. Yes.
Well, of course, we are running out of time, but I must say thank you so much for making time. That is Francis Otieno Amonde, the founder and executive director, CAP of UJI.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Appreciated. I hope you brought some few UJIs for us.
Thank you so much. We'll talk about that one.